Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel, Life After Loss. If this is your first time visiting, welcome. And if you are a returning follower, welcome back and thank you for supporting me. Make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications, email me with any questions, and also make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. So, we are going to today talk about grief inclusivity. I have here my good friend Sam, who I feel so honored to have with me today, just because, again, the purpose of my channel is to be able to give a platform to everyone who's willing to tell their story, just so that we can all see that we are not alone in this experience. So, Sam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I mentioned that we're going to be talking about grief inclusivity. So, what exactly do we mean by that? What exactly are we going to be talking about?
Coping mechanisms that can be accessed by anyone. Maybe grief looks like different things, doesn't it? We have different types of grief and we experience grief in different ways. So, inclusion for grief looks like accessing all those different types.
Right, exactly. And one of the things that I have mentioned time and time again is that the research and the information that we have available in today's society seems to either be outdated or seems to want to fit us into this kind of cookie cutter category. Would you agree with that, or do you think that the information we have is representative of what the actual grief experience looks like?
From what I've seen, no. I'm quite lucky that I haven't had to experience losing someone directly to me. But my best friend lost her father a couple of years ago. And one thing that she noticed when she was looking for grieving resources to help her cope was that the resources available were so limited and they were so fixed towards a certain audience. Like there was a lot of grief resources available for little kids and for older people, but nothing really for younger people,
Right.
nothing really directly for her own demographic, so like a young woman. So then she set off to start her own grief blog. Lots of other young women are doing the same thing, taking to Instagram to blog their grief experience. So it's a nice movement that you can now see is starting to happen as a result. But I would say there's still probably not enough.
Right, right. And I think that's something beautiful that even I myself kind of took matters into my own hands when I realized that when I lost my mom, I couldn't find anything that I felt like really resonated with me or was representative of my experience. And that can be dangerous just because, again, when you're going through this, when you have just lost someone and you don't know your right from your left and you don't know, what life is going to look like, you can become very rattled, hopeless, and experience a set of emotions that can get really intense. And especially when you're looking for information and you don't find anything, then you start to feel like this is only me. I'm
Mm.
in this alone, or there's something wrong with me.
You're in such a vulnerable position, aren't you, when you're experiencing that? And losing someone can be so isolating in itself. But then when you're faced with not having any resources or support, that just amplifies the way that you feel. When really, I think even though you shouldn't feel the pressure to connect with people, having that choice to be able to connect or just not feel like you're so alone makes all the difference.
Right, right. And of course we have to be grateful and thankful for having some information, even though it may not be relevant in today's society, but at least it gives us kind of like that foundation to kind of continue to branch off. That information should just serve as foundation, right? It shouldn't serve as, well, my grief doesn't look like this, so therefore I'm grieving the wrong way. Because as we've said time and time again here, there is no right or wrong way to grieve. There is only your way. So, Sam, talking about inclusivity, how do you feel that the information that is out there has or has not applied to you and to where you come from and the different factors that make us up as human beings?
Yeah, sure. So, as I said before, I haven't had to experience the classic typical grieving process because I'm very lucky. I've not lost someone very close to me just yet. Grief has obviously affected my life. Like, I have lost people, but in a quite indirect way. So, I've lost people who are still alive, for example, or I have lost someone who's passed away through the people that are still alive because of displacement or just losing them in life,
Right.
if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
And I think
Secondary losses, guys. Look at that video.
the link's in the description. Yeah, so I think that's another way that grief resources might still be lacking, because obviously secondary grief or secondary loss is a thing that happens to us.
Right.
But I feel like because it isn't so apparent and it isn't so significant in the same way, there's less information about it. Through grieving people who are still alive, I didn't realize that what I've been feeling all these years is grief. I came to realize that, oh, you can grieve for people who are still alive. That's what I've been experiencing. That explains a lot of why things have been so hard and challenging and yo-yoing and up and down. With that as well, with the whole inclusivity topic, personally, in my experience, so my parents are from different places. I've got one parent who's from the UK, one from Indonesia, and that in itself is a huge like mix of cultures, right? And I do think that grief is probably dealt with in vastly different ways. In Asia, generally, so that's a very broad generalization, but in Indonesia, certainly, you kind of just pick yourself up and carry on as normal. You kind of just have to crack on with your life. Whereas in the UK, even though there is definitely an element of having to just carry on and like expectations for you to just be fine after something happens. And not to say that there isn't a taboo with death, because there definitely is still, or like a stigma towards grieving and loss. I do think that the Western mindset is far more open. It's comparatively open and supportive and encourages like discussions and like networks. That was another kind of confusing thing to reconcile for myself. Like, how am I meant to deal with these strange feelings? And at first, I didn't even know what it was. So,
Right, because again, the way we view life is oftentimes learned through the lens of our parents, right? Because from young children, they pretty much teach us, okay, this is what the world is, this is how you do things. Because again, as a child, you're a sponge for information. And it's not until you grow up and realize, okay, is that really the way life works? Or is that just the way that I've been conditioned to view that life works, right? So I'm so happy that you were able to be courageous enough to kind of step out of that cycle and say, I don't think that applies to me. So, Sam, given all the information you now know, and you're still learning, and we're all still learning, how would you put side by side the way you viewed grief before actually diving into this research and information, and how do you actually view it now? Like, what would you suggest to people that have that expectation or that responsibility of feeling like I have to grieve this way?
oh my God, it's a lie. Don't
It's
believe
all a
it. It's a
lie.
lie. Like, as I said, I didn't even realize that what I was experiencing was a grieving process. I'm still going through it now. It's weird, especially when it's people who are still alive. So it's like you get given a choice to give yourself closure, basically. It's not like, oh, there's nothing I can do about them because they've fully departed this life. I have no choice but to move on. For grieving for people who are still alive, that's a choice that you need to give yourself. And you can either keep on reopening old wounds
Right.
because you're so familiar and you want to have that attachment, but actually, the difficult path is the best one for you, unfortunately. By the time I figured out that what was happening to me was grief, I was already quite clued up with these alternative resources. So, my best friend, Roz, she'd already gone through all the loss, and so she'd already been developing her own platform, and I'd already gained a fair amount of knowledge, if you like. So you are introduced to this cookie cut way to grieve as being like the classic way. But because I'd never had to grieve for anyone before, like I'd never had to even apply that to my life or
Right.
try go through the difficulty of trying to cookie cut my life in that way.
Right.
Yeah, by the time I recognized what it was that I was going through, I knew the more healthy way to look at it and the more healthy way to try and go about coping with it. So yeah, I can't really I can't really speak for comparison. All I can speak from is kind of the ignorance to my grief, to
Yeah.
understanding what it was.
And again, it's just acknowledging that while we may all have different experiences, and while some of us may not have necessarily have experienced the loss of a close loved one or anything like that, like grief impacts all of our lives, and just being courageous enough to actually step out of what is expected of you and realize, you know what, yes, this is the information that's being presented to me, this is what people are telling me I should be doing or I should not be doing. However, this is what works for me. However, this is how I feel, and acknowledging that how you're feeling right now is what you're supposed to be feeling right now, not what Betty Joe down the block is telling you to feel, not what Billie Jane from the other block is trying to tell you how you should be expressing your grief. It's whatever comes natural to you. And I think that being able to build a community where, again, we start to share our own experiences, where we kind of use the social media platform for good and to try to help and support and encourage one another. I mean, I've learned so much just through this channel, through my social media content, because of following other people with similar desires, right? Because it's like the desire to learn, to see what else is out there. Is anyone else feeling this? And realizing that people do understand and do empathize and are also grateful to you for being able to put yourself out there. I mean, that in itself is a stepping stone, right? Because then we realize, okay, I don't have to follow the rules or whatever has been presented to me just because. I can make up my own rules as I go, and whoever it resonates with, great. And if it doesn't, that's great too.
As well, like being told in a certain way to grieve, or being told that you should be grieving in a certain way, that resonates with me a lot. So when I was small, we lost my sister, but I was quite displaced from her, so I never had to grieve that process. I was also very young, so I never had to fully grieve it. But my dad, the grief hit him in a different way.
Right.
And obviously, when my parents are from different backgrounds, he really struggled because he was quite isolated. Where my mum's background expects people to just pick themselves and carry on, he really struggled to adapt to her way of thinking.
Right.
And so that pretty much sent him sideways. It's not a very happy story, to be honest, but that is the reality of if grief is left unchecked, or if you're not dealing with it in the way that you should be doing for yourself, and if you're trying to abide by what someone else's cultures encourage them to think, that's just not very self-care, is it? That doesn't make any, it's not very,
no,
it's not a very good way of dealing with it.
Right, because then you're left feeling disconnected. You're left feeling as though, again, you're isolated within your own grief, and as though there's something the matter with you. And when you feel like you're not validated within your experience, I mean, again, that can be a very slippery slope downhill, right? So, but I thank you so much, Sam. Honestly, like, I'm so grateful for our connection, our friendship, just because when I first met Sam, so as you guys know, I'm in Hong Kong. When I first met Sam, the minute I even said one word to her, I was like, I'm going to put her in my pocket and take her everywhere with me, just because she has such vibrant, healing, loving energy, where again, I didn't have to say much to her to know that we connected. So I hope that this is what my content, my channel, my platform is able to do for you guys. And again, I'm going to try my best to bring on as many people from different backgrounds so that you can see that, listen, whatever information is out there, that's great and dandy, that's great for foundation, but at the end of the day, we're the ones that sets the rules. We're the ones that dictate how our experience is going to go. So I truly thank every single one of you for supporting me, for following me along my journey. I thank you, Sam.
You're doing amazing,
I really
sweetie.
do. Thank you. She said, Mom, you're doing amazing, honey. So remember to please subscribe and follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and feel free to email me with any questions, or if you too would like to be a guest. Until the next time, bye-bye.
Bye.